Sarah Larby, guest host and producer of Everyday Investor with Toor. And today's guest is Andrew Choubeta from Caveat LLP. He is my go-to paralegal. He helps me ensure that I stay out of trouble and I'm doing the right things as a landlord in Ontario. But we've got some great tips and some great insight on how you can be a landlord, what you want to do to stay out of trouble, and find really good tenants that are not going to give you tons of headaches. And just like tenants give headaches, landlords give headaches too. It goes both ways. But we are bringing him on to talk to you at home. If you're going to think about being a landlord, you really need to know and watch the show, because there's going to be some great information that you're not going to want to miss. We'll be right back.
There's thousands of landlords, there's even more so tenants, right? And 90% of the people that are actually there are going through properties and living their life. They're usually nice people, right? 90% of them. But then there's that 1%, and if you have, if you have 1 million units inside a city, that 1% is no longer rare.
Hey, it's Sarah Larby here. Did you know that if you are selling your home or investment property, one of our preferred agent partners will sell it for you for free? That's right, 0 commissions. Head over to our website, everydayinvestor.com, to find out more.
You've always dreamed of having rental income, but buying a rental property? Well, that's a tall order. Capitalize on the space in your home instead. Renovate and rent out that space with ease with LegalSecondSuites.com and the team at Wise Construction Group. With LegalSecondSuites.com, our talented team of BCIN designers, engineers, carpenters, and tradespeople can transform that unused space into a beautiful, legal, and safe rental unit. We're empowering the everyday homeowner to become an extraordinary landlord. Get more out of your home. Visit LegalSecondSuites.com for more information.
Today, I want to talk about payment frequency. So many people think a mortgage is a mortgage is a mortgage, but there are so many considerations when it comes to customizing the right solution to you. For example, you can pay weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. What's the best option? For many people, they choose to pay weekly or bi-weekly because it accelerates the amortization, and it's like a forced savings plan. It's making them put the money on the mortgage. Now, another consideration to make here, and what I recommend for many investors, is a monthly payment. The reason why a monthly payment is effective is it holds cash back in the event of emergency, as well as it gives you the ability to make lump sum prepayment privilege. So these are the ability to pay lump sum with everything going towards principal. When it comes to this, there's no right or wrong answer, but getting the right advice is the most important thing. Reach out to myself and the Kyle Ford Mortgage team for any questions on this.
Andrew, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you on today. You are my go-to paralegal. You've helped me. You answer all of my crazy questions. You give some great insights. Really excited to have you on.
Thank you for having me. Fantastic. Yeah.
So, a lot of people maybe, getting into the real estate game or becoming landlords for the first time may not know the difference between a regular lawyer or a paralegal. What is the difference?
So a paralegal is a licensed representative to the Law Society in Ontario, right? And we do have a different scope of practice than a traditional lawyer, right? So a lot of us will work in landlord and tenant board law, some minor criminal matters, and in small claims. So I do a lot of work in landlord and tenant board law.
Okay. Now, there's some paralegals that represent both landlords and tenants, some that represent tenants only, some landlords only. What kind of paralegal are you?
So I only represent landlords.
Okay.
That's our firm specializes in really that sort of thing. We don't traditionally do too many tenant applications, so we only sort of side with one thing. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you cover all of Ontario, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of Ontario, what are some things that you're seeing, maybe some mistakes that some of the new landlords getting into this game for the first time are making these days?
The biggest issue that we're starting to see these days is just tenant screening, right? So you're having someone move into your property and the property's worth, upwards to $1 million, $2 million, depending, right? And not accurate screening who the individual's actually renting the property can cause you a lot of damage, right? So these days, because the landlord and tenant board's backed up for so long, it says on the board's website anywhere between 7 to 8 months to get a hearing date. However, are some matters that have stretched on longer than a year, right? And if you're going through a situation where you're dealing with non-payment of rent for more than 12 months and your rent is $2,000, you're bringing people very close to bankruptcy. So making sure you have your credit reports, making sure you're doing an accurate tenant screening. You know who these people are. You do have references from the older landlords, and you've corroborated these are in fact the older landlords. Right? People these days are getting very sophisticated at scamming landlords, right? So knowing exactly who's in your property, and then they are in fact able to actually afford the rental rate that's actually associated with the property, you should be fine. But we're finding these days that people, there are a lot of tips and tricks, but people are not even sticking to the fundamentals, right? So the fundamentals are your credit reports and et cetera. But some little bits of tips and tricks, people will, call previous references, but they won't corroborate if that individual actually owns the property.
Right.
Right? So then it's just a friend making a call, right? And that does happen quite often these days.
Okay, so tenant screening is the biggest thing, just not giving the keys away to the first person that wants to pay, first and last and move in tomorrow. Vacancies are really low in provinces like Ontario that you can, take your time screening. Vacancies for months and months is not necessarily going to be an issue. But you mentioned a couple things that were interesting because, I do believe that the majority of landlords, just like the majority of tenants, are good people. They do well and they likely will not have to come to you. So you see the worst. You probably see the 1% or the 5%.
Yeah, like no one calls me when things are going great, right?
Yeah.
So I see the very slim portion of the population, right? There's thousands of landlords. There's even more so tenants, right? And 90% of the people that are actually there are going through properties and living their life. They're usually nice people, right?
Yeah.
90% of them. But then there's that 1%, and if you have, if you have 1 million units inside a city, that 1% is no longer rare. They're everywhere, right? And that 1% can cause a lot of damage if they're flipping from one house to the next house to the next house. And I don't know the exact figure, but I think it's something around 70% of all landlords are smaller landlords. They're not the massive corporations, right? And you have that 1% that touches that landlord's, asset, and that could be someone's retirement. It could be the entire amalgamation of their life's work inside that property, and someone can come along and cause $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 worth of damage, and they're forced to sell, foreclosure, and any quick Google search can bring up a multitude of horror stories, right?
Yeah, and I will say it goes both ways. There's 1% of horrible landlords out there, and they're the ones that make the news, and give, I think, a lot of other landlords a bad name. And just like, many people watch the news and the media, and that 1% of the bad tenants could end up on the news, and nobody wants to get into real estate, right? So I will say the majority of the time it is a good experience, but it goes back to what you mentioned, the tenant screening piece is going to be key. I think also there's maybe a knowledge piece, right? So let's talk about the RTA. What is the RTA? Why should somebody read it? Or should somebody read it before they start? Or is it important?
It's the governing legislation for all landlords. It's your Bible, basically, right? I am a firm believer, if you do not read the RTA, you're not a landlord. Right,
the Residential Tenancies Act, essentially, and every province has a different version.
Yes, so if you're in Alberta, it'd be something else. So I practice in Ontario, so it's the Residential Tenancies Act. Now, it's the governing legislation that officiates over everything, right? So it also goes straight to the Landlord and Tenant Board as well. So it does have all the governing legislation from anything from rental payments to contracts, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm a firm believer that. I don't know anyone that wouldn't know how to handle a very complex piece of equipment if they didn't read the manual, right? But there's a lot of landlords who just don't read the RTA. There's a lot of people to this day that are still thinking, for example, the biggest myth out there, everyone wonders that you can't evict someone in the winter. That's a myth. Yeah, it's been the case since like 1995, right? But people still think of this idea, right? Another major one was that if you accept rent, all of a sudden it now assumes to be a tenancy, which is not the case at all, right? So a lot of people just don't read the act, and very much they should be. And I'd recommend tenants to read it, and I'd also recommend landlords to read it. There's no reason why you shouldn't be informed, right? And the more information that's disseminated out there, the better people will inherently be towards their landlord and their tenant.
Yeah, because I'll tell you, some provinces are different than others, but in Ontario, it is geared towards the favoring landlord or tenants rather than landlords, and so it is very, very hard. You can't just expect your lease to be done and be like, I'm not renewing it, see ya, bye. It doesn't actually work that way, and I think that's another myth and another misconception that a lot of newer investors getting into this think that once your lease is up, the tenant has to move out. Let's talk about that.
The RTA was established from something called the Tenant Protection Act, right? Now, there's a good reason why the act the way it is, because at one point in time, a landlord could simply do whatever they wished. The reason why they call it landlord, right? So you could just clear people out of properties at a very simple rate, right? Now, depending on where you sit on the aisle, some people will argue very hotly that the pendulum is swung way too much on one side, right? So, knowing exactly where you sit in regards to the RTA is going to be incredibly important. You are right. There's some people that think that you can just renew your lease and you'll be perfectly okay, but that's not the case. I don't know if throughout my colleagues, I can't speak for all of them, but I can tell you for sure, this is very confusing. It's a very confusing type of work, right?
Yeah.
I can't work alone, right? I have my colleagues Angie and Glenn that we rely on each other for our strengths and weaknesses, right? Glenn specializes in one thing, Angie specializes in another thing, and I specialize in one specific type of thing when it comes to our own practice. But there's a lot of convoluted gray areas in the RTA, right? And then practice and moving that towards practice about how you're actually supposed to be a landlord. It's very confusing, right? So, and a lot of the times what we're having to do is we have some of our clients just call in asking for basic questions every 2, 3, 4 months because they need a resource of sort of interpreting the act. And a lot of the times, and I've done this with you when you've called me, it's kind of, maybe, it's gray.
It's very gray.
No one's gonna know, right? It depends on what the adjudicator would say if it came up to a hearing. And it's like, I can't really tell you. I would leave it in their hands because I don't really know. It's a decision that they would have to make on this basis because sometimes the act isn't so clear and sometimes it's very crystal clear, right? So it's a happy balance in between the two, right? And it is important that you be informed very quickly if you're deciding to go down this road.
Yeah, absolutely. So the RTA, reading that, doing your tenant screening, I think the other thing would just be to have on your expert team, right? Just like when they have their lawyer, their mortgage broker, but a go-to paralegal before they actually need stuff. Before they actually have problems. So I don't know if that's even a thing, but are there paralegals on retainer? And is that something, right, is that something that you would offer? So if somebody has questions just about just getting started and not getting themselves into some hot water, what would they do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and promote only myself, but my colleagues are very good, right? I have colleagues, that's throughout the GTA that are very fantastic, and working on everyone works in LTP these days, everyone, because it's just a big juggernaut when it comes to paralegals, right? It's the 400-pound gorilla that you can't sort of get past. You have to know it, right? It's becoming more prevalent within teaching when it comes to Mohawk, Algonquin, etc. Right? And instructors are moving towards a lot of that because it's where the representation these days is moving towards, right? Okay. And there's a lot of paralegals that offer free consultations, and a lot that will just simply take your call to sort of help you out. There's quite a few, right? And I would recommend having a paralegal on retainer. It doesn't have to be me, but it should be someone, right? Like somebody out there that's there on retainer with you that you can call at a moment's notice because you don't know what you're doing, right? There's a joke within our community that the best landlords are paralegals because they always know what's going on, right? That's kind of true, right? When it comes to property management, maybe not so much, but when it comes to the law, absolutely. There's no reason why you can't operate as a landlord or as an investor these days without a paralegal. Like it's just like I'm an investor myself. I don't see how it's possible, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and especially because you're also saying, if you have a non-paying tenant or you've got a tenant, causing some problems, and you choose to go through the board, it's going to take 7-8 months, maybe more, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of time. And for a lot of people, that could be, the difference between them actually being able to, be okay or having to sell the property. Because, if a tenant is not paying for 12 plus months and you've got to carry a second, a third, fourth, et cetera, property, very quickly you're going to run out of money.
So let me give you an example, okay? So this is a client that called me 2 or 3 days ago, right? And I heard about this situation, and I was sort of assisting him with it, and it's been resolved and it's completed. But the gentleman called in, and he had a really great relationship with his tenant. Lovely lady. He's a great guy. She's a great person. There's no bad blood between either of the two. She, unfortunately, has had some issues with work. Non-payment of rent has slipped into non-payment of rent. He was giving her a break. He's waited. He waited for 3 months. The monthly rent is $3,000. 3, 6, 9.
Adds up
He's at
quickly.
3 months. He's calling me now, and now he's thinking, okay, you know what? Unfortunately, we got to start the process. Like, I don't want to evict this lady, but I do need to start something because this can't continue.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, you know, obviously this is now 3 months. It's going to be 12 because
Yeah.
it's going to be 12 months
Right.
of non-payment if it goes to, you know, the board. And he went, oh, that's how long it will be. I went, yes, that's how long it'll be. And he went, I may be in a little bit of trouble here. I went, well, he's like, I can probably maybe last another 4 months.
That's unfortunate. So, you know what, we'll continue this conversation right after the break, but I do want to start getting into some more of these stories so people see what is potential downside of this business and take the proper steps ahead of time to try to avoid those mistakes. So don't go anywhere, we'll be right back. Hey, it's Sarah Larby here. Did you know that if you are selling your home or investment property, one of our preferred agent partners will sell it for you for free? That's right, 0 commissions. Head over to our website, everydayinvestor.com, to find out more.
The mortgage world has changed. Has your advice? Are you looking for a modern approach to your mortgage planning process? Advice tailored to your unique, ever-changing circumstances? Whether you're upsizing, downsizing, purchasing, or refinancing, the Kyle Ford Mortgage team works with individuals and companies to custom tailor the right mortgage product for you. Working with a wide selection of lenders, we're here to serve our clients and help them achieve their real estate and retirement goals. Contact the Kyle Ford Mortgage team today, Canada's mortgage choice.
Hey guys, it's Ken from LegalSecondSuites.com, and one of the most important parts of planning any renovation project is to understand your lot, your property boundaries. If you're planning even for a simple basement apartment where we have to add additional parking spaces, we need to know what the lot boundaries are. If you're planning a rear addition or a second floor addition, the city wants to know the lot boundaries. And so when you go and purchase your home for the first time, make sure you ask your lawyer to try and get your property survey. If there's one that's not available, go get a Ontario land surveyor to create one for you. It will show its benefits much later on down the road when you least expect it. I've had lots of experiences with neighbors over fence lines and property disputes, and what saved us was a legal lot survey. It clarified everything that we needed to know about our property.
Hey, it's Rav. A few years ago, I learned how to trade stock options by taking the Theta trading course. My son, my friends, myself, all of us benefited immensely by applying their strategies, and I want you to have that same benefit by taking their course as well. I'm not receiving any monetary benefit whatsoever by telling you this. It's just that, as you know, I believe that knowledge mitigates risk. Visit their site to find out more.
Hello everyone, First Access Condos is bringing you back to the hammer on November 1st. We have a fantastic project coming out in Hamilton, 75 James. Over 600 units, beautiful cascading tower, which is already well under construction. It is almost fully excavated. That means when you sign this fall, you are gonna get your keys in less than 4 years for a project of that size. And I guarantee you one thing, this is gonna be the best price in Hamilton that you've seen in a long time. First Access Condos, don't be second.
All right, welcome back. I'm speaking with Andrew Choubeta, my paralegal, and we are talking about what you need to know as a new landlord, what you should read, what you should do, how not to get yourself in trouble. I mean, obviously things can still slip through the cracks even if you do everything the proper way. But let's go back to the situation that you were saying that that person waited that extra 3 months before submitting the formal forms or even calling you, and all of a sudden they are told they might have 12 more months of non-payment. So walk us through the rest of that story.
Yeah, so like I said, he's at $3,000 or give or take per month of non-payment of rent, and he's at 3 months already before he decided to consult with a representative, and then from there, before even submitting his forms, he's now looking at a loss of 20, maybe 25. If there's any issues with that hearing when it comes up, it gets adjourned. For example, someone's sick, ill, maybe the landlord tenant doesn't have enough time on the docket. It could be another 4 or 5 months. So he's looking at $25,000 to $35,000 worth of damages just like that, and he won't be able to survive.
Well, in the meantime, there's mortgage payments, there's taxes, there's utilities, there are other bills that landlords, like, it's not like we own our houses all free and clear for every single small landlord that's out there. Many of them are probably just breaking even.
Yeah, like that's the big misconception. I don't know why people think that this is like a large.
And some people are losing money.
Yeah, there's like people like to think that the market does this every once in a while, right? And they think that landlords are making this insane amount of cash because you see HGTV and all this kind of stuff. Not everybody. But not everyone does. The vast majority of people bought a house when they were in their 40s or 50s, decided to rent it out for their pension, and that's their income, right? So we're seeing quite a bit of that. Like, and there's no shortage of violent tenants, difficult tenants. I've had people pull knives, guns, crossbows, archery equipment out on me, sports memorabilia. I've had everything.
You've had a cougar in a property, like an actual cat.
Like an actual cougar, inside a property, right? I evicted someone that had a monkey in the property inside in Burlington. I've dealt with exotic animals. I've dealt with the gentleman trying to build a moat around the house, right? And then someone that stole AstroTurf from a stadium and used it to landscape his backyard. Stuff goes on and on, right? But that 1%, that person is going to go from that property to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And people, when they're evicted, they go somewhere, right? And
goes back to tenant screening.
Yes.
Where did they come from?
What happened? What was the previous landlord saying? It's like, well, because there's a lot of rental scams out there. You call the landlord and you're sending money overseas.
Some landlord scams of people pretending that they own the property. Yeah. So it can go both ways. But yes, there's a lot of fake documents out there too.
Yeah. And the most dangerous thing is those landlord scams. People are getting very sophisticated these days, and people are legitimately renting out properties and then baiting and switching with tenants out, and these poor tenants are sending $3,000-$4,000 overseas, and now there's a legally binding contract between a landlord and a tenant, and the landlord doesn't even know who the tenant is, and these things are getting very, very sophisticated these days. So I caution everyone on proper tenant screening. People you try to disseminate it out, people just don't do it, right? And a lot of people are just sort of skating away at I know her, and the biggest fault of landlords is referrals. Someone gets a referral from a friend and they know her or she or he from work, and then this person's a great person, and they move them in, and then no credit report, no tracking, no real name, no driver's license, nothing, and they don't really know the person. Anyone could be nice for 10 minutes. I can be nice for 10 minutes, right? I'm out if I'm at work, right? So that's the biggest issue, right? You need to know who's in your property, because your property's worth several thousands of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
100%, and several months of headaches and potential, eviction time before you actually get the bad tenant out. So, obviously there's lots of horror stories, but let's talk about, if you have a good tenant, what are some things that a landlord should do in general, right? So, there's rent increases, there's all of those things, but just to be a good landlord, and if you have a good tenant, what are some of the standard processes? Yeah, so
like you said, standard practice for N1s, right? For increase of rent as your market inflation, etc., as it goes up, because we find these days that people aren't doing that over 5, 6, 7 years, and that's a really big issue eventually when it comes over our desk.
So the rent increase, I do want to talk about that, because I think that's a big one. I think people sometimes forget. They're like, oh, they're such good tenants, I'm not going to give them the increase. We didn't have any increase for, I think, 2020, there was no increase. 2021, it was 1.2%. 2023, it's 2.3% for any rent-controlled units. That's the stuff that was built before November 15th of 2018. Afterwards, as of right now, you can increase by market rent, but you still need to give them a certain number of days, right? 90 days.
Yes.
I got to fill out the N1 notice, and every province is going to have a different notice. But 2.5%. What's inflation?
Oh, off the top of my head,
8% right now, 7-8%.
Like yeah.
7-8%, but you can't raise it inflation.
Yeah, and then not only that, you've got utility changes, the stuff really goes up, right? And the same thing that tenants are very upset about. Everything's going up. Gas prices going up. Hydro, diesel. Yeah. There's still oil-fed, properties, right? There's still gas, propane properties with heat. This stuff is very expensive. So doing your N1s are very important because. And it's sometimes if it's the people that own the one unit, they get away with it for quite a serious amount of time because they don't particularly need that extra income. But if you have 14 to 20 units, 15, and then you're not doing N1s, you've just really caused a big issue for the next 2 years. And if you're, if you came to me or came across my desk, I'd be very upset with you because now I'm trying to fix your mistake from 3 or 4 years, right? So it's very difficult to deal with. And not only that, but simply
like selling it too, right?
Yes.
Like how are you going to sell it if like you're like way below market, you're half because you never raised the
Yeah,
rents?
yeah, you're damaging your purchase price ridiculoly. And doing the biggest thing is documentation with maintenance too, right? You should be doing maintenance checks at least 3 or 4 months, at least once a year. Like, but people don't even do that, right? So once a year check.
Checking the batteries on the fire, carbon, like all that stuff, right? Because you can get a lot of trouble if you something happens and you don't have the backup documents.
Yeah, the number one biggest complaint is the chirping of fire detectors, right? That's the biggest thing because people don't change the batteries every year. Doing that, being on top of that, doing maintenance checks for the outside exterior of the property, and then having all those documents ready to go. Like people don't, have the serial numbers for their furnaces, don't have the serial numbers for their fridges, don't have, and they have 20 units. It's like, well, you need to know all of this stuff. So when you sell the property, you have a package just to give the new landlord. Here's all your stuff, right? A copy of the leases, right? If you don't have a lease, get a lease. Have the tenant sign a lease, right? That should be a thing. But there's people that still do, like verbal contracts are the worst thing in existence when it comes to tenancy because you don't know what's happening. And it defers to one side, which is the tenant, right? So, if you're moving someone in, do not have a verbal contract. It causes a lot of issues because he said, she said, etc. You need something on paper to know exactly. And there's an Ontario standard lease that you should be using, right? And then an attached addendum to it. People, again, still don't do it. You need to do these things.
So I'm glad that you mentioned the Ontario standard lease. I mean, we all have to use a standard lease, I think, in most provinces, but it is kind of surprising how bare it is. And we were just together at the Ontario Landlords Watch conference over the weekend, and when I was speaking about tenant screening, and I asked, okay, how many of you guys are using the standard lease? Everyone raises their hand because you have to. And then how many of you guys have an addendum to it, and like a quarter of people's hands were raised. Why is that a problem?
Okay, so an addendum is incredibly important, incredibly so, because it sets out the actual terms of the lease, that like a little more specific things. Now, the Ontario standard is, again, standard, right? It's not specific to the property. You may have certain things at your property that may be unique, and I mean, every property is unique, so it means that you must have it anyways, right? As every landlord should have an addendum. So, for example, if you have common space, right? Exactly what those common spaces are, which area they are, right? Because if you have a verbal contract with someone and they're entering the property, but let's say they move into that common space. Well, it's like if you don't know, and it's been the case for more than a year, then all of a sudden it's grandfathered into the lease. So, and then he said, she said. You may have one intent, and the other person may have another intent, and it may be genuine. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be, he said, she said, or vice versa, or anything confrontational. Just there's a miscommunication, and those addendums are very important when it comes to clarifying exactly, like what are we talking about exactly when it comes to terms of the grass. How far usage you have for the backyard. If you're able to park a trailer inside that property, some people if it's a gravel driveway, a landlord may be okay with you, putting an 18-wheeler there. Right, that may be fine. It's the tenant's a trucker, but some landlords may not because it may crack the asphalt and may have issues with that. Right, so there's a lot of things that those addendums are important for. Right, and then also protects the landlord quite considerably, and it protects the tenant. Right, I know a lot of landlords demand and must have their tenants have tenant insurance. Right, that's a really big thing, very important. Right, it protects the tenant. It's very cheap too. The premiums are not that high, and in addition to that, there's a lot of landlords that need to protect their properties from rain, sleet, snow, acts of God, hurricanes, etc. It's like, hey, you know what? Like, I remember we had that big storm back in Hamilton not too long ago, and shingles were flying right across the property, right? And if there's damage to the tenant's property from that, a lot of cars had a lot of damage. It was all over CHCH. It was all over the news. It's like, these things actually do happen. Right, and it's important to protect yourself from those things.
And there's liability insurance from a tenant's perspective that you can ask for along with their content insurance.
Yes.
So what does liability insurance essentially protect a landlord for?
So it depends on the type of insurance, because liability insurance is a very broad scope, right? But slip, trip, fall, etc. Like it's a lot of things. But
you want both?
Yes, you do, right? You should. If I was I'm not a tenant, I own my own property, but if I was a tenant, I would want to protect myself, right? Like, why would you not have that, right? If pipes burst all the time, and then all of a sudden your TV's been destroyed, it's a $2,000 TV. Where are you going to recoup the cost? The only choice you have is to go to insurance or the landlord, and it's easier to go to the insurance, so you might as well do so. Yeah. Right? So it is a very important concept.
So there's a lot to learn as a landlord. There's a lot of things that can go really awesome, and you could do really well in this industry. I mean, you're an investor as well. You have many properties, in this country and not in this country. But I think it's important to also know the downside and mitigate your risk along the way. So we'll add your contact information, and folks, get a paralegal, on your side. This is really key to ensuring that you can ride this wave for many, many years to come, and that you don't end up as the 1% of the horror stories that we see out there, because they do really suck. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And you at home, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week.